For most of us, the morning routine before work is just this totally thoughtless transaction. You grab your coffee, pack your laptop, commute, you just do your job.
Right, yeah. It's just muscle memory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what if, before you even stepped out your front door, you had to, like, meticulously strap on a heavy, invisible suit of armor?
Oh, wow. That's a heavy image.
Right. And you put on this layer of defense, not to fight, but just to exist. Just to exist in a professional space that was, frankly, fundamentally not built for you.
I mean, that creates an unseen tax on your energy, right? You
Well,
end up spending this massive portion of your cognitive capacity just managing how you're perceived long before you even open an email.
long before the first meeting even starts.
Mhm.
So why does that invisible armor exist? And more importantly, how do we dismantle it?
Welcome to this deep dive, which is brought to you by Business Link Media Group.
Yeah, and we are so excited to get into this today. We really are. The two of us just spent the entire day, April 14th, 2026, for those keeping track, walking the floor at the Exchange in Niagara Falls for the third annual Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit.
It was such an incredible day.
It really was. And the mission today is to take everything we witnessed there and answer one core question. How do we move DEI past like a corporate buzzword and actually translate it into real structural action?
Which is such a critical question, especially because the atmosphere at the summit today was just, I mean, it was so vibrant.
Oh, totally. The energy was amazing.
You had the multicultural showcases featuring Ukrainian, Filipino, and Chinese traditions. People were mingling around the raffle baskets, attendees connecting over these shared experiences.
Yeah, it felt very celebratory.
It did, but it is very easy to absorb that electric energy, feel super inspired, and then go back to the office on Monday and change absolutely nothing.
Which is exactly why we need to unpack the mechanics of how exclusion actually operates in our daily lives. So whether you're a manager trying to hire the best possible team or, someone navigating a workplace that constantly asks you to compromise your identity.
Or even if you're just fascinated by human behavior.
Yes, exactly. There is a massive shift in perspective waiting for you here. Okay, let's unpack this.
I think the most profound place to start is with the sheer physical and mental toll of that invisible armor you mentioned earlier. That was the real focal point of Lindsey Mazza's opening keynote.
Oh man, that keynote. You could hear a pin drop in that room.
Seriously, the hushed atmosphere was so powerful. She completely commanded the room from the moment she stepped on stage just by asking everyone to close their eyes.
Right, and visualize what you would say or do if fear simply didn't hold you back.
Exactly.
I found myself immediately picturing a scenario and then realizing, the person sitting next to me was likely visualizing a completely different set of fears based on their own lived experience.
Yeah, because we all carry different weights. And Lindsey illustrated this perfectly with that story of her two photos.
The contrast was wild. She projected this image of herself from 2013, the day she officially became a lawyer. And on paper, I mean, that's the pinnacle of professional achievement, right?
Right, the ultimate success story.
But she described feeling this overwhelming sense of dread because that path forced her to bury who she actually was. And then she contrasted it with a photo from 2025.
When she's hosting her own TV segment.
Yeah, hiding in plain sight. And she just looked genuinely alive and aligned with her purpose.
Well, the contrast in those photos stems from a really deep biological and psychological reality. For over 30 years, Lindsey was hiding her Holt-Oram Syndrome.
Which, for those who don't know, affects the skeletal structure of the upper limbs, right?
Exactly, particularly the bones in the arms and hands. So it is a very visible physical disability. And to navigate a world built for able-bodied people, she essentially had to build a psychological armor.
She talked about dissociating from her body.
Yeah, dissociating and forcing herself to work twice as hard just so she would never have to ask an institution for support.
Because the institutions taught her very, very early on that they wouldn't offer it anyway.
Which is just heartbreaking.
The story she told about being a 6-year-old in grade 1, I mean, that was harrowing. Her parents had carefully set up this simple buddy system accommodation so a friend could help her use the washroom.
Just a basic, totally reasonable accommodation.
Right. And her teacher flat out denied it. A trusted authority figure looked at a 6-year-old child and basically sent her off to figure it out alone.
That single moment in the washroom completely crystallizes the origin of the armor, because the child learns two things in that instant. First, you must become hyper-independent because literally no one is coming to save you.
Wow. Yeah.
And second, and I think this is far more damaging, your body is a liability in this environment. You are not safe as you are.
And carrying that knowledge every single day is exhausting. It keeps you protected from immediate rejection, sure, but the sheer weight of hiding your reality is draining.
It really is.
I do find myself wondering about the practical realities of the corporate world, though. Like, isn't a certain degree of adaptation just the normal price of admission for entering the workforce? We all curate a work persona to some extent, don't we?
Well, adopting a professional demeanor is one thing, but having to fundamentally suppress your identity, your cultural norms, or your physical needs just to be perceived as competent, that is a completely different magnitude of adaptation.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and Lilian Lum Mbah addressed this exact distinction during the afternoon panel. She pointed out that our baseline definition of professionalism is not some objective, universal truth. It's deeply subjective and culturally bound.
Lillian's perspective as an immigrant from Cameroon really drove that home. The example she gave regarding the senior care industry was incredible.
Oh, the greeting example.
Yeah. She noted that in her home culture, if a younger personal support worker walked into an elder's home and casually greeted them with, "Hi, Henry," it would be considered a profound insult.
Like a massive sign of disrespect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It completely violates foundational cultural rules about respecting elders.
Meanwhile, here in Canada, that casual first-name greeting is basically the gold standard for friendly, approachable professionalism.
Right. It's what's expected.
So an immigrant healthcare worker is forced to actively fight their deeply ingrained cultural values. They're overriding their internal moral compass just to perform the Canadian version of professional.
And she also brought up the bias she faced regarding her accent, right? Feeling this immense pressure to stay silent in meetings just because she sounded different from the dominant group.
Which is so common, unfortunately.
But I loved that she eventually reached a breaking point. She just decided that if her words were understandable, the discomfort with her accent was the listener's problem to solve, not hers.
And that decision to stop accommodating other people's comfort, that's a way of shedding the cognitive load. When you're constantly code switching or suppressing a visible disability or mentally translating cultural values, you are paying a massive cognitive tax.
It's just draining your battery.
Exactly. The dominant group in an office gets to apply 100% of their brainpower to solving the company's problems. Underrepresented groups might only have like 70% of their brainpower available for the actual work.
Because the other 30% is
Yeah.
locked up in managing how they're perceived.
Exactly.
It is staggering to think about how much raw talent and innovation companies are leaving on the table simply by making their employees exhausted.
Right.
But, I mean, this all assumes those talented individuals actually made it into the building in the first place.
Yeah.
The reality is, a lot of people don't even get the chance to put on that armor because they are stopped right at the door.
Yeah, they don't even get an interview.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting. This connects directly to the statistics Dr. Secil Ertorer presented that just shook the room.
Oh, the global rankings on workplace discrimination. That was intense.
It completely dismantled the myth of Canadian exceptionalism. We always tend to view Canada as this insulated, multicultural utopia.
We really do.
But Dr. Ertorer shared a study ranking 10 wealthy industrialized nations on workplace discrimination, and Canada ranked 4th.
Wow.
Yeah, we trail significantly behind Germany, which had the least discrimination. And we only look moderately better when compared to France, which ranked the highest.
And the mechanics behind that ranking become brutally clear when you look at the resume studies she cited. Researchers continually run these experiments where they send out identical resumes, same education, same work history, same formatting.
Everything exactly the same?
Everything. The only variable is the name at the top of the page. And resumes with traditional white-sounding names like Emily Walsh received 50% more callbacks than identical resumes with names like Jamal or Jamila.
50%. That's huge.
Yeah.
And she also highlighted that massive Canadian study spanning Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. They found a 35% callback advantage for white names over Chinese, Indian, or Muslim names.
It's just an overwhelming statistical reality.
But here is where we need to kind of look under the hood. If a hiring manager sees 2 identical resumes, why are they throwing one in the trash? Like, are we assuming every HR department is filled with people actively and maliciously plotting to exclude minorities?
I mean, sometimes, yes, explicit prejudice does play a role. We can't ignore that. But more often, we're looking at a phenomenon researchers call the Matt versus Samir problem.
Okay, the Matt versus Samir problem.
Yeah, and it is rooted deeply in evolutionary biology. Imagine a hiring manager screening 400 resumes for a single position. They are fatigued, they're under pressure, and making split-second decisions.
Right, they're just skimming.
In a high-stress environment, the human brain desperately seeks to reduce its cognitive load by using automatic categorization. So, when the brain encounters something unfamiliar like a name from a culture it doesn't intimately know, a region called the amygdala lights up.
Right, the amygdala. That's our primitive fight-or-flight center, right?
Right.
And it's the part of the brain scanning the horizon for predators.
Precisely. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, unfamiliar basically equates to potential threat. The amygdala triggers this subtle alert.
Interesting.
And because the brain craves the comfort of predictability, it automatically reaches for societal stereotypes to fill in the blanks about this unfamiliar name. The hiring manager unconsciously assigns less competence or more risk to Smear's resume simply because it didn't provide that immediate biological feeling of safety that Matt's resume did.
Wait, so if it's just our amygdala firing automatically, before we even have a conscious thought, does that mean human brains are just naturally wired to be racist? Does biology give us a free pass? Because that feels dangerous to say.
This raises an important question, and the answer is absolutely not. Biology is the explanation, not the excuse. Dr. Ertorer was very clear that we cannot just throw our hands up and blame evolution.
Okay, good.
While the amygdala reacts automatically, human beings possess a highly developed prefrontal cortex. That is the region responsible for conscious, rational, deliberate analysis.
So we can override it.
Yes. The goal is not to pretend we are perfectly objective beings without implicit bias. The goal is to design hiring structures that act as speed bumps for the amygdala, forcing the prefrontal cortex to engage.
She actually shared a great example of this in practice. A colleague of hers warned her before an interview, noting that the candidate had a thick accent, and explicitly asked her to look past it, to focus on the content.
Right, by verbalizing that, he manually engaged her prefrontal cortex.
He interrupted the automatic heuristic.
Exactly, and you can scale that interruption structurally. You can anonymize resumes during the initial screening process, just removing the names entirely so the amygdala has nothing to react to.
That makes so much sense.
Or you can use highly structured interviews where every single candidate is asked the exact same questions and scored on a rigid rubric. Rather than relying on this nebulous feeling of culture fit, which, let's be real, is often just code for my amygdala feels comfortable around you.
You feel familiar to me.
Yeah.
Well, if human brains are so prone to these lazy shortcuts, it makes total sense that we would turn to technology to solve the problem, right?
You would think so.
But Amandipp Singh from Enable Talent pointed out on the afternoon panel that our tech solutions are often just digitizing our human flaws.
Yes. That was such an eye-opening moment.
He framed it with this brilliant thought experiment. He said, try doing your job for just one day without the ability to see, or without the ability to hear, or without the use of a keyboard.
And the point being that the lack of access to a standard interface does not diminish your intelligence or your work ethic or your problem-solving capabilities.
Not at all.
It simply exposes the extreme rigidity of the tools we require people to use.
And Amandipp is partially blind, so he spoke from experience. He spent a lot of time discussing the absolute nightmare of applicant tracking systems, the ATS software that companies use to filter applications before human ever even sees them.
Right, because we assume an algorithm is completely objective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Amandipp pointed out that a highly capable neurodivergent candidate, say, an autistic software engineer with off-the-charts coding abilities, might struggle to format a resume with the exact corporate buzzwords the algorithm wants to see.
So the ATS just acts as this rigid, unthinking gatekeeper. It penalizes the presentation of the data rather than evaluating the actual potential of the human being.
It totally reminds me of a rigged carnival game. You pay your money and throw the basketball, but the hoop is artificially manufactured to be slightly smaller than the ball.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Thanks. And when the ball bounces out, it isn't the basketball's fault. The game itself is poorly designed. We are relying on algorithms that match formatting tricks to keywords rather than developing systems that map actual skills to necessary job functions.
And this friction between dismantling old rigged games and designing new ones, this brings us to one of the most socially complex dynamics discussed at the summit.
Yeah, we have to talk about this part.
Because when you start changing the rules of the systems, you inevitably create tension. Jonathan Belgrave brought this dynamic to the surface when he discussed how the pendulum is swinging in corporate recruitment.
It is a very real tension in the modern workplace. And looking at it objectively, without taking sides, he observed that some young men are entering the workforce today looking at specialized recruitment streams, diversity quotas, targeted mentorship programs.
And they're feeling a genuine sense of displacement.
Exactly. They are questioning why they have to navigate barriers that previous generations didn't face, and they feel like the definition of merit is shifting right out from under them.
They perceive the introduction of equity measures as a reduction in their own opportunity. They're viewing the corporate landscape as a zero-sum game.
Right.
At the same time, as Jonathan pointed out, marginalized groups are still expending immense effort just to reach the baseline starting line. This friction is really at the heart of the intense modern debate surrounding the label of the DEI hire.
And Yusuf Al-Harazi from the Niagara region stepped in to address that specific debate. He highlighted this fascinating double standard in how our society currently evaluates merit.
It was such a sharp observation.
He pointed out that when a company hires a middle-aged white man, his colleagues do not walk past his desk and silently question if he actually deserves to be there. His competence is just the baseline assumption.
But the moment a person of color, a woman, or a person with a visible disability enters that same room, a completely different standard is applied.
Yep.
They are frequently labeled a DEI hire, and their qualifications are immediately subjected to this forensic scrutiny. And it all circles back to the amygdala. The familiar demographic is assumed to be competent by default. The unfamiliar demographic is assumed to be the result of a quota.
Yusuf made a compelling argument that fundamentally flips the script on what meritocracy actually means. He argued that DEI initiatives do not lower the bar. When executed correctly, they actually perfect the concept of meritocracy.
Which is such a powerful paradigm shift. If your previous hiring system utilized an algorithm that filtered out the brilliant autistic coder,
Right.
and it relied on human biases that tossed out Samir's resume, and it had rigid physical environments that excluded Lindsey because her disability wasn't accommodated.
Then you were never actually hiring the best candidate in the market.
Exactly. You were merely hiring the best candidate from a severely restricted, artificially comfortable talent pool.
You were basically winning a race where half the competitors had their shoes tied together.
That's exactly it. By actively removing structural barriers and consciously bypassing implicit biases, you drastically widen the pool of available talent. You ensure that your evaluation is based on actual capability rather than just familiarity.
We have covered so much ground today, pulling from all these insights shared at the exchange. We've explored the exhausting weight of invisible armor, the cultural complexities of code switching, the biological shortcuts of our brains, and the rigged carnival games of corporate tech.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. So what does this all mean? When you synthesize all of this, what is the ultimate takeaway?
I think it all distills down to a crucial distinction Lindsey Mazza made regarding power and design. We throw the acronym DEI around constantly, but she broke it apart beautifully.
I love this part.
She said, diversity is presence. It is simply counting who is in the room. Inclusion is participation. It is noting who actually gets to speak at the table. But equity is influence.
Influence, yes.
It is about who holds the power to make the decisions, change the rules, and actually dismantle the armor. We have to evolve from passive awareness into actionable amplification of those voices.
Like, it is not enough to invite people to sit at the table if you are completely unwilling to let them change the menu.
That is the perfect way to frame it. So my challenge to you, the listener, is highly practical. The next time you are sitting in a hiring committee or reviewing a colleague's performance or even just feeling friction about someone's quote-unquote professionalism, take a deliberate breath.
Check in with yourself.
Ask yourself, am I operating from my amygdala right now? Am I letting my brain seek the path of least resistance by favoring what feels comfortable and familiar? Or am I actively engaging my prefrontal cortex to intentionally make space for a style, a background, or a perspective that differs from my own?
It really requires constant vigilance. And, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up.
Oh, I'm ready.
We spent time today analyzing how human brains rely on biological shortcuts and how we hope to use technology to bypass those flaws, right? But as artificial intelligence increasingly dictates our hiring algorithms, our screening software, our corporate communications, we face a critical danger.
Because AI learns from us.
Exactly. AI models learn by ingesting historical data, and our historical data is thoroughly, deeply saturated with human bias.
Oh, wow. So the black box of AI could simply automate our worst instincts.
Precisely. What happens if we aren't careful and we accidentally teach our AI to inherit the fight-or-flight biases of the human amygdala?
That is terrifying.
Right. Will our future algorithms serve as our ultimate allies, imperfectly leveling the playing field? Or will they just evolve into a digital, highly efficient, and unfeeling version of our oldest human fears?
Man, that's a lot to think about.
It is. And until we have the answer to that question, it is on us, the actual humans in the room, to make sure we aren't forcing the people around us to wear a heavy suit of invisible armor just to show up and do their jobs.
The structural change really has to start with us.
It does. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you on the next one.